Hello and Merry Christmas. I'm coming with this fun background of our tree. I'm back home for Thanksgiving, Christmas break, and things like that. And so yeah, I get to film here with my old puppy who we've had forever. Anyways, so this final project, choose a culture, a country, part of the world, things like that, to study their communication style. So the country that I chose, I don't know, it seemed the process of picking was not too important because it was like I just have to pick one that I don't know a lot about and then go from there, and then I'll learn more about them, which is exactly what happened, thankfully. So I chose Peru, which I talk about this in my paper, but I know of Peru. I know like the country, like kind of where it is, like, oh, South America, Peru, like Spanish, whatever, But then I was like, I mean, that is well known as far as like it's a thing, but it's not as much like I know their communication style. I don't. So, well, now I kind of do because I researched and studied, which is what we're going to dive into now. So, the themes that I observed from studying the communication style of Peru and Peruvian culture were a few overarching things. The first one is their indirect communication, like their nonverbal. Indirect is so much stronger and so contrasted in light of like the American way of like, oh, being blunt, like get to the point, do, stay on your schedule, things like that. It is very far from that, from what I observed, what I read. Their communication style tends to be much more, even in verbal communication and nonverbal, it's just very not direct. It's indirect. That's the word that many websites use that I researched from. And so, yeah, indirect, you might think, okay, so, they're not very blunt about stuff, but the statements that like shocked me almost when I read them, I was like, I couldn't believe it, was these few sentences I'll read. In Peru culture, it's common to say what you think they want you to say rather than the truth. Like that's just a norm. That's a cultural norm, is just to like tell people what they want to hear versus what you actually think. And I don't know, that is wild to me. That is very different from how I personally I operate. And so it's hard to even imagine how that would play out in an entire country. Like that's the norm. And then another one, along with the indirect, nonverbal, things like that, was the conflict avoidance. So it says the Peruvians tend to avoid conflict, and like kind of just put on their best face in any like public situation, even if it's really painful or problematic, were the words that this website used specifically. So there's this like idea or this theme of diplomacy. So kind of like, which sounds maddening to me personally, just honestly, it sounds maddening, but I'm sure if it's the way you grow up and it's how you function, then you learn how to know what people are really meaning, but it sounds like a lot of deciphering. But it does say that in close relationships, there's much more strong indirect communication. But overall, just like in general in public, like, oh, we don't talk about that kind of stuff, or like, I don't know. So those were the two main things overall that I observed, and I am glad to have learned, because those are things that I wouldn't have, like if I was visiting this country or something like that, I wouldn't have thought to look into this type of like deep communication style. I would have just been like, oh yeah, they speak Spanish. So, and so like it'd be good to know Spanish if I go there or something like that. versus here with like the indirect communication, valuing like relationships and things like that over like time and structure, avoiding conflict in public, you know, kind of putting on a good face and like telling people what they want to hear, just in being polite instead of like saying what you really think. Like, these are valuable things to know and very different from my own experience, just personally and in our American culture. So yes, that is an overview. The paper goes a little bit more in depth, but I am glad to have gotten the opportunity to dive deep into Peruvian culture and their communication style.